So, calling in the ring this week, it was difficult to come up with a concept for this week. I gotta say, uh, I got to about Wednesday and Thursday or so, and I still had nothing. Last week took a lot out of me for whatever reason. I'm not really sure why. Wink. So, uh, but yeah, I, I went back and I looked at in my memory banks, like, man, I haven't been to an indie show in a very long time. Having kids doesn't really lend itself to going to too many things, actually, especially when your wife works second shift. Um, my parents are, getting older and I have two kids now. And, one of them is two, which is a handful in and of itself. You add her brother, who's six, on top of that, and it's just a lot. So I try not to ask them to watch them too late into the night too often. Just for their sake, really. Uh, so I haven't been, and then before that, there was the pandemic that locked everything down for the most part. So I haven't been to an indie show in years, but I used to go all the time. We have Excite Wrestling here in the Southern Tier of New York State. Before that, it was 2CW, Square Circle Wrestling, which was, probably the best independent promotion that I've ever attended a show, with the exception of Ring of Honor during not really as glory days, but I did go to a couple of Ring of Honor shows in 2007, and one of the Hammerstein Ballroom in 2009, or not 2013, which was great. Um, but yeah, I got to see them in 2011 in the weekend leading up to WrestleMania 27 at I can't remember what it's called, but it was at the sound station where they filmed WCW Saturday Night.
Hmm.
So it was really, really special. But I'm thinking, you know what? I've been to a lot of indie shows, but most of them didn't have nice or historic venues like that.
Hmm.
Most venues that host indie shows are decidedly less prestigious than that. And I had feeling that Aaron, being in the business, you've not only attended, but you've probably worked more shows than I've attended. So between the two of us, I'm sure you and I have been in some really, really shady venues to watch wrestling. So I think it might be fun to kind of share some stories about some of the oh what did Vince McMahon once call them, uh, bingo halls and uh, smoke filled parlors and whatever,
Hmm.
like his tone aside and his rewriting of history aside, yeah, I mean, there are those venues. So I figured, why don't we commiserate about some of our experiences in such venues?
Right.
I think the weirdest venue I've ever seen a wrestling show at was a bowling alley. It was, they had hardly any room for it, too. I was in college, and one of my friends took me out for my birthday. It was like some NWA affiliate, some small NWA affiliate out uh, in Western New York. It wasn't in Buffalo proper, but it was close by, and it was the show was it wasn't good. I don't think I recognized a single name. To this day, I don't think there was anybody notable on that card that ever made it anywhere. But indie wrestling. It was my first indie wrestling show as an adult. Like I'd been to like a couple. Like there were there were a couple of Ilio DiPaolo uh, memorial shows that I went to with my dad. It had mostly WCW talent, but it was technically an independent show. It was a memorial show. So, but this was like my first like real experience on my own without parents or anything like that. And it was something like the crowd there, like, there was still bowling going on in the back. Like you could hear sometimes the bowling was louder than what was happening in the ring and the crowd reactions. Like it was so weird. I know it was. it was the weirdest thing. Like, why would you even do this? Like, but I mean, none of the talents really stood out. Unfortunately, it was a lot of basic stuff, but nothing super memorable except that my it was my first like indie show as an adult. It was in a freaking bowling alley where half the audience wasn't paying attention. Like they tried to do some stuff like on the outside, tried to get the crowd involved, but like half the people there were too concerned with getting drunk cheap because again, bowling alley.
Mhm.
Uh like it was I felt looking back on that, man, I feel so bad for those wrestlers because of the environment that they found themselves in. Like nobody was really engaged. I tried to be as engaged as I could, but like it's kind of hard to when there's so many loud distractions given the actual location. Like that's just inherent to the location. So
Mhm.
like I think that's probably the weirdest location I've ever been to a wrestling show.
Man, weird ones for me. Dime a dozen really, but the weirdest one was in a Pizza Hut parking lot. Okay, so we had a wildfire here. This was this year.
Oh, was it
Yeah, it
recent?
was this year, this recent. So we had a wildfire here this year, and we kind of set up this promotion in my hometown about 20 miles outside of where the center of this wildfire was. Set up a kind of off the cuff charity show. Now it was supposed to be their regular monthly show, and that we kind of pivoted and turned into a charity show. But this was also the first month that they were kicked out of their regular venue. So we were looking like off the cuff for someplace to go. And I guess the owner found, he went to Pizza Hut and they were like, yeah, you can just do it in our parking lot. So in the middle of August
Ooh,
in
ooh, in
Texas,
Texas.
on a blacktop
Oh,
parking lot, we have this show and we set up seats all the way around the ring, but it was so hot outside that like the only crowd that was sitting near the ring were sitting under the overhang of the Pizza Hut on the sidewalk, and
I'm
everybody
getting
else was,
dehydrated just thinking about
yeah,
this.
everybody else
Ooh.
was parked in their cars around the ring and in the grass and everything, just like sitting in their cars, and instead of cheering and shit they would honk. So that was weird. um
Drive-in wrestling.
yeah, to make it even weirder, we had like a charity battle royal, uh and I went over. So
Yeah.
I was outside the basically the thing was I was outside the
Oh,
ring
you
repping the
showed me
battle
that clip.
royal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
jump
you
in
showed me
after the guy wins, quote unquote, and I shit can him and I win. So I'm 1-0 in wrestling, and I won a
that.
battle royal
As the
um,
referee.
as a referee. But it was at a Pizza Hut parking lot for a charity show that almost no one attended. I think we maybe raised. I think Pizza Hut probably spend more money feeding us for free because they did, to their credit. But I think they spent more money feeding us than we actually raised at that show, just because
Ooh,
it was so like off the cuff. It was happening very quickly. We barely had any of the wrestlers we normally have. We were running matches where guys were, on their second or third match of the night because we just didn't have the depth of roster,
right.
and it was hot as all hell and just bad. I mean, it's not the hottest show I've been to though, and we'll get to that one.
Ooh.
But the weirdest venue I've ever worked or been to a show at is a Pizza Hut parking lot in August.
Ugh, that sounds oppressive.
It was oppressive.
But at least you went over.
Yeah, I
By
mean I can't
you
complain. I
went
went over.
over by not going over the top rope.
Not sure at
Obligatory
40
dad
I want to
joke.
take that bump.
No problem.
So yeah.
I just needed to get an obligatory dad joke in there so that my
Ha
friends
ha
groan when they listen to this episode. Hi guys.
ha. Ah.
Um, I've seen, you know, most of the indie shows I've seen have been in Legion halls. There was one point where uh, Excite did a show though in a different Legion hall than they normally did. It wasn't. They eventually the Legion hall that they normally would run in eventually would decide that they didn't want to hold wrestling anymore.
Mhm.
But this was still before that. They just had a conflict on the date, so they had to hurry up and do a different Legion Hall across town, and it was such a different building. Like the normal one, it was super duper high ceilings. You could pretty much whatever you wanted. Everybody was used to the layout. This one, the ceilings were so low that the ring wasn't even like elevated. It was like just like there was a platform that they put it on that was part of like the setup or whatever. But like it was the ring was flat. Like I've never been seated to watch a wrestling match where I was that close and on like the same level as the mat. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was very strange not looking up or out, you know? It was very odd. The wrestlers could get really, really close, which was kind of nice. But like the ceilings were so low that like anybody trying to do anything high flying was really, 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 really putting them and anybody else at risk.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as good a show as it could have been if it had been in the normal venue. But like that was pretty weird too. But like I've never been close enough to the action where like I could see individual beads of sweat on a guy while they were in the ring and I was seated 5 seats back, five rows
Oh,
back.
wow.
Like it was really strange. Um, I don't know. It was that. I'm glad they never really ran a show there again because it was kind of neat, but it's also like, ugh, I just miss my old venue. you
Right.
where there's more room to breathe and like there was more seating in the other venue too, in the original venue too. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was far more comfortable. Even for the wrestlers setting up their merch table, like it was during the intermissions at the first Legion Hall where they did most of their stuff. It would be just like right by the ring, like right along the wall there. Like they didn't have to go very far. This, because of the layout of it, you had to actually go out into the hallway, which was about 10 degrees cooler than it was in the actual hall that the ring was in. And this was in the wintertime too. Like wintertime in upstate New York is no joke. Like it sucks. Being in a cold hallway is not where you want to be. It's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Like, even if it's like at like 58 instead of 68 in the winter, you will feel, especially when that hallway is connected to the door to the outside and if the wind rushes in, it's just, it gets right. You don't want to stand in those lines for merch. Like you start to wonder about making the decisions like, oh, do I really want this shirt this badly? Like, like, and there were people who left the line and made that decision. Like, nope, no, this isn't worth it. Like
Mm-hmm.
me, I had, I my this was before we knew about him. My buddy George, who wasn't there at the show this time, and this was before we knew about him. He was trained by Drew Gulak,
Okay.
and Gulak was on the show, and I was like, oh, I want to support George and his trainer, and so like I had made the decision to stay in line, and we even did like we even like shared inside jokes about George and stuff while we were at his table and stuff. I bought a Catch Point T-shirt, but basically more to support George and his aspirations than Drew himself, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes any difference. But um, so I made that commitment because of my friend, but I didn't really blame anybody who wanted to get out of that line. But
Amen.
yeah, it was. I'm glad they didn't go back to that venue. Let's just say that.
Ugh. Okay. Well, my next one, I've got two more. I got a third
Me
one
too.
that's kind of important. But this one, okay, so I live in Texas. I live in the panhandle of Texas. I actually live in Amarillo, Texas. Now, one thing that is across the board true about Amarillo, Texas is that we have an extensive Hispanic population here and in the surrounding areas. We're farmland, so of course, but we have I mean, like, I'll put it this way. All right. I have shows like wrestling shows or concerts at venues that hold 5,000 people, and I'll get 2,500, 3,000 people in there. If a Tejano band of any stature enters that building, it's a 5,000 seat sellout, period.
Hmm.
If a lucha show, which is where we're going with this, comes to town, they'll put 1,500 people in a building that doesn't need 1,500 people in it.
Yeah.
So around 97 or 98, I believe. It was CMLL or AAA. My memory is terrible, guys. Okay. Especially post military, it's a lot worse. So I'm just trying to get this was only a few parts of this show are super memorable to me. So remembering the whole thing as a vibe is a little difficult. But around 98 or 99, it was either AAA or CMLL. Somebody was doing a tour and they came to Texas and they did like 6 or 7 stops in Texas. And nobody expected them to come to Amarillo, but they totally came to Amarillo. Unfortunately for that, they did their show at a warehouse that held about, I would say, comfortably for a wrestling show with seats and stuff, probably about 1,000 people. Okay. They put 1,500 people in this motherfucker easily. There might have been 2,000, maybe 2,500 even. There was a lot of people in this place to the point where I was like in the second row, just, okay.
Yeah.
Here's the kicker. All right. 2,500 people in this motherfucker. It was like June in Texas. There was no air conditioning in the building.
Oh.
So I don't blame my fellow wrestling fans for the way they smelled, but you can only imagine how it smelled in there. And I know I was the culprit as well. I was sweating buckets and my deodorant gave up the ghost a long time before I noticed that it stunk in there. Okay. But it was bad. Okay. But on the flip side, I mean, that's the first time that I ever live laid eyes on Super Colo or it was the second time I'd seen Juventud Guerrera, and he seemed less fucked up than the first time I saw him. So it was actually a good match.
If those
Uh,
guys were in it, was probably AAA
it might have been.
because WCW had that working relationship with AAA through
Yeah.
Conan.
So we had a few guys there that I remember. Pero Aguayo Jr. before he passed away was wrestling at that show. That's I was super sad when that happened because I'd only seen him one time in my life before that happened, and he was fantastic.
Yeah, I only
So
really know him by reputation. I know that in doing our PWI tournament a couple of weeks ago, his name appeared in the top 10 at least one year.
mhm.
I want to say 2006 or seven or somewhere in
Yeah.
that era.
So
But
I mean,
I've never actually seen any of his work. I just know that he's highly regarded.
mhm. Well, the show was great. The guys were it was so hot in there, dude. The guys were sweating so bad their tights were doing the discoloration from the sweat. Like it that was bad. The venue itself it was a warehouse in kind of a shadier part of town, so super shady. But yeah, the big thing was whoever
But
the
not
promoter
shady
was.
enough, right?
Yeah, I guess not because the promoter, whoever it was, oversold the place by at least 1,000 seats or 500 seats, and there was no AC, and he knew that. I'm going in. I'm pretty sure. So
Carney's gonna Carney.
Carney's going to Carney, but yeah, that was. I mean, the next one is a little different, but that yeah, shady venue number two, this warehouse, random warehouse in the middle of Amarillo with no air conditioning, which I'm
Oof.
sure doesn't actually exist anymore. I think they may have gentrified that part of town now and made it like a part of downtown or something like that. But I don't think the warehouse is there anymore. I'd have to drive by and see.
Uh, wow.
Yeah,
Ugh.
and it stunk, boy. Oh God,
I feel so bad for everybody in that situation.
dude, nobody was safe, dude. There were people like there was a lady next like I mean I speak
They're
enough
dropping like
Spanish.
flies.
Yeah, I speak enough Spanish. There was this abuelita next to me, little old grandma lady next to me who was super into the matches, but she kept turning to me and going, "Honey, it stinks in here. If I didn't love these wrestlers, I
Yeah.
would leave." You know,
Oh,
like she was just like, "Oh God, it's
oh,
so bad."
Abuelita.
Oh, poor abuelita,
Oh,
like, and she's
oh, I
shorter, so
already love her.
she's like
She's
at
from
everybody's
1999.
armpit level, man. And she's just, I know she's getting the worst of it, but she's trucking and like rooting for the matches and stuff. But man, it
you can't
probably
be you can't be the toughness of a Mexican grandma.
no, heck no, heck no. I was horrified by the whole situation, and it was hotter in there by a lot than it was at that parking lot show.
Oof.
It was bad.
Yikes. Well, that's horrible.
It gets
My
worse.
next one isn't really horrible. It's just weird. It wouldn't be the last time, but it would be the first time that I'd ever seen a wrestling show in a mall.
Don't you love
My
them?
friends and I, uh, it was a 2CW show, and it was the second uh, match that they put on between Team 3D because it couldn't be the Dudley Boys, and a pre-Bullet Club Young Bucks.
Oh
It was
wow.
like they were just forming Bullet Club at this point. So
Oh
Bullet, it
wow.
wasn't like it wasn't the phenomenon that it would be become that it would become. It was on the rise, but it was Bullet Club were they weren't original members, but they were pretty close to the beginning
Hmm.
there. And so this was the Dudleys had won the first one, and this was the rematch. And it's like, oh, we gotta see it. So
Right.
we drove an hour. I think it was to Horseheads. Yeah, the Arnott Mall. I'm pretty sure. So we drove an hour from home to see this, and we're not like super familiar with the mall. We've been there like a couple of times each individually, but we weren't really sure where we were going. We drove around the mall parking lot a little bit, like where are we supposed to park? Like it was so strange because most of the rest of the mall was closed down at this point because it's a wrestling show. It takes place at night, so like all the shops, it's like 8 o'clock at night, and they're all like closing down. And so the mall itself is a ghost town, except for whatever space. I can't even remember what store or whatever it was, but whatever space that they put this ring up in was rocking. The people were there for that match in particular. This was also where I first saw the world's cutest tag team for the first time.
Hell
Candice
yeah.
LeRae and Joey Ryan before we discovered he was
Before Joey Ryan. Yep.
a weirdo. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, but it was a great show, top to bottom. Really glad I went. But yeah, it was in a mall, and it was like I said, it was a ghost town except for this one ring, this area where they packed several hundred people in there like sardines to watch the Dudley Boys face the Young Bucks and again not put them over. Like like you want to know why the Young Bucks have a chip on their shoulder? It's because of crap like this. Like that's probably why. It's like, oh, you want to go too? So you're not even going to put us over in the beginning? Like we're like 15 years younger than you are. We're the future of this business. You're old heads. Like you don't lose anything by losing. You're
Hmm.
still the Dudley Boys. We're trying to create a like so selfish, so selfish. I don't know. To be fair, I don't know whose decision that was. I don't know if it was the Booker. I don't know if Bubba and Devon, probably not Devon, but knowing the ego on Bubba, I don't know if he pressed the the issue or whatever. But like the Bucks should have gone over in the second one. They
Hmm.
should have. Like I I point to things, not necessarily that one, but two things like that. Those experiences are why I give the Young Bucks a lot more slack than certain other people. Is because I've seen it with my own eyes, where they've been screwed over by the old boys club.
Hmm.
It's like no wonder they had to make their own way. Like no wonder they had to think outside the box because despite their obvious talent, the fact that they were getting over with fans, nobody wanted to do business. Like at that point in time in the industry with them. So like, yeah, I don't blame them for making their gimmick basically ripping off the best acts of the '90s and flaunting it in your face. I don't blame them for going over in Japan for doing BTE. I don't blame them for starting their own wrestling company and saying screw you to the WWE who never wanted them in the first place until they already got some buzz that they were
Hmm.
just going to mow over when they rebranded them anyway.
Yeah.
Like I don't blame them. I give them a lot more slack because of that show in particular show me that's like man that shouldn't have happened.
Hmm.
That really shouldn't have happened. How often is this happening to these guys and other guys like this? Like, so it was a weird venue and kind of an eye opening night for me as a fan, as a Smart Mark fan.
All right. Well, now, like we mentioned earlier, I'm in the business, so I've probably worked a shitload more shows or been to a shitload more crazy venues. So just a couple of honorable mentions that have notable
Okay.
things about them. One, a bar that I used to have music shows at called the Rec Room had a company called Nightmare Pro. The bar is in a really seedy part of town, like Super Gangville.
Yeah.
I used to have my shows there because it was $300 to rent the whole venue.
Oh.
But and they had a really nice stage and the best sound man in the city. period. Okay. And he owned the venue. So I
Sounds like a
like the
good
guy.
deal.
Good spot, good deal for music shows. For wrestling shows, kind of different. I think beer was cheaper or something. But anyway, the notable thing about it was that Mosh Pit Mike, one half of the JCW Tag Team Champions, threw beer bottles at the crowd and got himself and the company banned from the building. Yeah. Um, then I also saw him legitimately whoop another wrestler's ass for going off the top rope and landing like with a crutch and landing in between Mosh Pit's legs and hitting him right in the nuts. And he legitimately no sold it, got up off the thing, said, "You son of a bitch," grabbed him by his mask, picked him up off his feet, and started punching him in the face. So honorable
So
mention
much
number
for
one.
professional wrestling.
Yeah, so much for professional. That was the least professional show I'd ever been involved in. So anyway,
Boy, do I have a show to tell you about.
Second honorable mention, also a mall, where the promoter or whoever was in the mall working with the promoter thought wrestling ring meant 40s boxing ring. And so our wrestling ring was a wooden platform with four wooden posts and loose actual ropes. It looked like
Oh
a 40s boxing.
no.
The guys went out there and worked their ass off to their credit and they bumped the fuck out of that wooden platform, but it was the worst show I've ever been part of, bar none.
Oh.
No one was there for the show. No one. Okay. The mall
Oh,
was
that's the
promoting it and
worst
no one gave
part.
a shit, but that ring was the worst. Um,
Oh,
so
to work on that in that environment to
I
no
took a ref
fans
bump on
too,
that. Fuck
that
that.
sucks.
It was
That
terrible.
sucks because you're doing unnecessary damage to yourself because nobody's there.
And nobody's there. I mean, the company got paid good by the mall to do the show, but it was a fucking shit show from point A to point B.
God, sounds like
So
it.
honorable mentions out of the way. I am now
Dishonorable
go yeah,
mentions.
dishonorable mentions. I am now going to drop a story I have never told in public, and the only people who know about this are the people who were there, and maybe my wife. I think I might have told her this one,
You
and my
hear that?
brother.
World exclusive.
World exclusive. Okay, so back in 2000, I was just getting into the business. I was greener than squirrel shit. Um, I took a very long, like I went to the military after this, and I took a very long hiatus between that point, and I had a family, and then I went back to wrestling. But when I first started, my buddy Chris decided he wanted to be a pro wrestler because he thought pro wrestling was cool. So he found a wrestling school in Amarillo, and he came over here and he started training. He paid his $1,600, right? And he came over here to pay to do wrestling. The reason it was $1,600 though is because the guy who owned the wrestling school and the sole trainer at the school was Chris Romero, aka Chris Youngblood, former
Okay.
WCW Tag Team Champion. His
Yep.
family is super thick out here. Old Man Rapid
Yeah.
Ricky Romero is a legendary guy from the 60s.
He's well respected.
I'm pretty sure Rocky Romero is one of these Romeros, but I'm not sure. I've never met Rocky unless I have, and that's actually Little Rick, but I'm not sure because the body style between the two of them when I knew Little Rick and what Rocky is now is like a Gunther level change.
I'm gonna
Okay,
look that
so
up.
Rocky might be Ricky. I'm not sure, but if it is, I've met him and worked with him actually. So anyway, I got involved because Chris was the only guy training. No, not the same guy. I didn't think so. Anyway, Chris was the only guy training at the school at the time. And so he needed a guy to bump for him and stuff like that. So I got to come for free and I learned how to move around the ring as a wrestler and how to take bumps. I didn't really learn any offense because my whole point there was to assist my friend Chris in learning offense. So I got to go for free and I got to go to their shows and stuff for free. And I eventually got to a point where Chris and I liked each other, Romero and I ended up working at his shows. And so I was working security, greener than squirrel shit, and we go to this place called the Gamboa Ballroom here in Amarillo, a place that still stands to this day and still has events. Now, out from the outside, it looks like a normal Tejano bar. Once you get inside, though, it has this very confined cube building with a stage at one end that kind of extends off the cube. And it has like a little like runway off the stage. And at the end of that runway is where we set the ring up. But around that is a flat piece of floor that would maybe hold 50 people standing, and then stadium seating all the way up to the roof of the bar. So it's like a little gladiator arena.
Okay.
Super cool.
I mean, that kind
Okay.
of sounds cool,
It
really.
is okay. So the venue itself is actually pretty cool. And a couple of things that happened while I was there, like the first time I ever met a legitimate luchador who kept their mask on from the time they were there until they left, was was at this show. I met this guy. I also met Cedric of Hollywood, who I think went on to be an ROH later, but he was the very first time I knew an indie guy could be super huge because he had a theme song by Pantera and he was wrestling in a like 100-seat venue in Amarillo. But I think he was on ROH later. He might have been on WWE some, not as like a main character or anything, but his
What's
name
the
was
dude's name?
Cedric of
Cedric of
Hollywood.
Hollywood.
Cedric of Hollywood. So I met that guy. I met the legitimate first luchador I'd ever met. And I'm there with Chris Romero and his trainee, my buddy Chris, and um, we're at this show. And he's like, "Hey, Aaron, one of my security guys didn't show up tonight, so after you help set up the ring, I need you to work security for me." And I'm like, "Okay, cool, no problem. I'm already in my blacks because I'm helping set up the ring, so I'm part of the crew, so I wear black, 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 because theater kid."
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So, and that's the same uniform for the security guys. So I'm like, okay, cool, I'll do security, no problem. All right. Matches are going, everything's cool. This bar is serving up the dollar beers, so everybody's getting fucking hammered. It's mostly a lucha show with Chris Romero promoting it, so it's big here in Amarillo. There's a lot of Hispanic and indie wrestling fans just kind of packed into this place, probably more than the 100 that should be in there. I really didn't pay attention to how big the crowd was, just what was happening in front of me as a security guy, because everybody's getting hammered and this venue's little. Like it wouldn't take much for a guy to get from the front row to the ring. Like there wasn't that much
Yeah.
space. So I'm standing there. There's a guy there. He's been in front of me the whole night. It's no big deal. I was standing there before he sat down. He's been drinking a lot. I noticed he's been drinking a lot. He's kind of a small guy, so I know he's probably tipsy. And
Yeah.
he's yelling and just rooting for the matches. Everything's fine. It's normal, right? Like everything's cool.
Right.
Then the luchador guy that I met goes in for his match with Cedric of Hollywood, and Cedric goes over. And this is I don't know how to say still real to me, damn it, in Spanish, but this is one of these moments. Okay. This guy is pissed that this luchador went, had to put over Cedric. And he is trying to come over the rail. So I arm grab classic, one arm him up under his underarms and I put him back in
Yep.
his place. Mira, stay there, bro. Okay. Don't
Yeah.
move. No va. Okay. And he's like, and I don't think he speaks very much English. So he's trying to communicate something back to me, but I'm not understanding because it's loud in there.
Yeah.
And then the next match is starting to start and I turn my back to make sure nobody's, fucking with anybody behind me, turn back around and he's got a knife in his hand. And I'm like, oh, hell. I mean, I had not been to the military yet. I knew some martial arts, and I'm green as squirrel shit in the wrestling business. I was
Yeah.
not even aware that this was a possibility. Okay.
Yeah.
At this
I mean,
point,
who
in
would have thought of
1998, this is a work, guys. Come on.
that?
It was way like in the 80s, maybe, but now, no.
Yeah.
So,
This isn't Memphis in 1975.
right,
Okay.
right. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And before the guy can make a move on me, apparently I'm not the only one watching this guy. And I have a guardian angel, and his name is Chris Romero. Because Chris
Yeah.
Romero, all 260 something pounds of him, comes across that venue faster than I've ever seen anybody move and tackles this guy clean off his feet. Just whoo. I mean, all I saw was a blur of Chris Romero in front of me, in between me and the knife guy. The knife is suddenly on the ground, which I then pick up and fold up and put in my pocket.
Yeah.
And the guy's on the ground with Chris, and they're yelling at each other in Spanish. And I don't know what they're saying because it's too fast and everything's too loud. I'm not that fluent. So I hear they're yelling at each other, but Chris, hey, did you get the knife? Yes, I have it. Okay, get him out of here. So the other security guard, this fairly sizable black, I don't think he would have done this to the other guy. But the fairly sizable black fella, that's the other security guard with me, he comes over, we get this guy out of it, and you kind of throw him out, and I don't give him his knife back.
DJ Jazzy Jeff style.
Yeah,
like,
straight up,
yeah.
dude.
Yeah.
Straight up, back of the neck and back of the pants, and he was out.
Yep.
But I gave the knife to Chris because I didn't know what to do with it, and Chris was like, "Hey, I'm really sorry that happened." I'm like, "Dude, no, you saved my life." Like,
Yeah.
why am
Holy cow.
So yeah, Shady Ass Venue, the only time in my entire wrestling career beyond making a bad call in a wrestling match that almost got my ass beat by a wrestler. The only time I've ever had my life threatened in the wrestling business, legitimately threatened. Um, there are fights that happen in this business. There are backstage is like any other business. There are people you don't like, and because it's wrestling and it is we're pantomiming at a combat sport, it is a heated combat environment and fights happen back there. Okay, that it's just the truth. I'm not saying I condone it, but it is the truth. But it's the
It's
only.
unfortunate.
But that said, that's the only time I've ever felt that my life was truly in danger in wrestling, and the person who hired me handled that himself. So
Yeah.
super. R.I.P. Chris. I will love you forever. I'll never say a bad word about you. Um, but that's the only time, and that makes it the shadiest venue I have ever been in. Despite the cool layout and the cool people I met, and actually, what was really an awesome wrestling show, I almost
Wow.
got stabbed because somebody was mad about a finish.
It
These
was still real to them,
days,
damn
these days, he better pray that shit was made of chocolate. Um, but
it.
then no, that was a whole different Aaron. That was a pacifist debater theater kid Aaron who was doing wrestling because
Yeah.
it was cool and not because I had any desire to be part of a combat sport or
Right.
anything like that. Um, so yeah, I mean that was before Ref Aaron. That I wasn't even really technically training to be a wrestler. I was just like a
We're there as
motorbike.
base.
Yeah, like a motorcycle gang has hang-arounds. I was just a hang-around, but I helped my friend Chris learn how to wrestle and bump, and he's fantastic. I really wish he would have kept doing it. He'd be in WWE or AEW right now for sure if he had kept doing that stuff. But like me, he also had a family and took a long break and decided not to go back to it when he had the opportunity. Where I did go back and eventually, kept working. But Chris Romero, man, fucking like I said, I'll never say a bad word about him. There's some things I know about him that even the Dark Side of the Ring producers have been interested in, which I might tell another day. But I won't ever say that he was a bad person or an asshole or anything like that because he did save my life once, and I owe him big for that. And I'm really sorry that I couldn't return the favor at some point before he passed away.
Wow. That's nuts.
Dude,
That
yeah.
story's
Yeah,
nuts.
I've never told that to a lot of people. Like
Like
my
I've been to
brother
crazy
heard that
shows, but
story.
I've never had my life on the line.
Yeah, man. I mean, still real to him, damn it. I guess I laugh about it now. It was not funny in the moment, though.
No.
I was
Well,
just like,
no. You
I
can
don't
laugh
know what
about
to
nearly
do.
anything 20 years
Oh
after the
yeah,
fact, but
it's 24 years later. I'm definitely
yeah.
laughing about it now because I'm alive. But
Yeah.
then I was definitely not laughing. It definitely some trauma responses definitely came with that situation. I definitely didn't come
Yeah.
back and work any shows for a little while. And the next one I did was with Doink the Clown. uh, and Jake the Snake Roberts and Juventud Guerrera in the depths of all their addictions. And it was a shit show from front to back. And I'll tell that story on this show one day too. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to have a
All right.
wrestling stories with Aaron segment one day. I've noticed.
Yes. I think that should be a recurring thing.
maybe. Because as we do this podcast, I'm remembering more and more cool stuff.
Yeah.
But we have
Yeah,
less
we
than a
gotta cut
minute.
it
So
off. Yeah.
we're going to cut it off. But thanks for joining us, everybody. And we'll see you next week.